The following podcast deals with the controversial subject of marine mammals in captivity. In the 35-plus years that have passed since Marineland's closure, there's been a huge sea change in public opinion about this topic, and rightfully so. Throughout the course of this podcast, I hope to deal with these issues with honesty and sensitivity, while also acknowledging the tremendous awe, joy, and respect these animals have inspired in millions. And now, on with the show. On episode 3, we'll discuss how Bimbo the pilot whale's continuing troubles led Marineland staff to make a tough decision about his future. We'll also look into the growing business of killer whale capture and retrace the beginnings of one of Marineland's most iconic landmarks, the Sky Tower. So grab your popcorn, walk up the zigzag ramp past the oval fish tank, and make your way to the Killer Whale Coliseum to get a good seat before the show starts. But before you sit down, there's one warning. If you're listening to this podcast in the first 5 rows, you will get wet. You may get soaked.
Seven-tenths of our world is covered with water. In Los Angeles, there's a place that overlooks this vast frontier. A place of wilderness. A place of drama. Hold your breath. It's Marineland. Plummet into global oceans teeming with life. Go eye to glowing eye with predators of the deep. Venture into a realm as intriguing as outer space. All a touch closer at LA's own Marineland.
In 1965, Marineland of the Pacific was the number 2 attraction in Southern California, behind Disneyland. Given the park's proximity to Los Angeles, Hollywood productions flocked to Marineland in the 60s. In 1964, CBS aired the hour-long Marineland Carnival, which was basically a commercial for the park. The stars were the Beverly Hillbillies, who drove their jalopy 40 miles from the 90210 to Rancho Palos Verdes in the 90275. Ellie Mae decorated the park for the festivities, and Granny did a skit with the walruses. Later that year, the Hillbillies drove their jalopy back to Marineland because Jethro thought it was a place where he could sign up for the Marines. At the park, Granny got snapped at by Bubbles, Jethro put on a diving suit, and Ellie Mae swam with the dolphins.
I like you. You think if Jethro joins up, I'm going to see can I take you along. And I'm going to put you in the cement pond. Me and you will learn Skipper to swim. Do you like that?
In 1965, the cast of the Munsters visited Marineland looking for a pet for young Eddie in the big fish tank.
Herman, Lily, come quick! I found the octopus department.
Oh. My, this is a nice store once you get inside.
Oh, wait, it's over there. That must be a sales lady bringing it out for us to look at now.
Oh, isn't it darling?
That's the cutest thing I ever saw. It just makes you want to pick it up in your arms, doesn't it?
Also in 1965, Lucille Ball came to Marineland for an episode of The Lucy Show. For some reason, she headed to the park to meet up with baseball star Jimmy Purcell of the California Angels. And for some weird reason, Jimmy loses a ball, and Lucy winds up in the water in the sea arena, where the crazy redhead is toyed with by a frisky dolphin and a rambunctious sea lion. Around that time, Clint Eastwood, the star of TV's Rawhide, visited the park, where he was photographed pointing a gun at a sea lion's head. If only PETA were around in those days. In 1967, the world was rocking out to Monkey Mania, and the Prefab Four ruled the airwaves in television. Alana Nash, a teenager from Tennessee, won a date with singer and heartthrob Davy Jones, who took her to Marineland, where he got the dolphins jumping. Unfortunately for Alana, when she met up with Jones, there were 20 other girls who won the contest. In 1968, the King, Elvis Presley, came to Marineland for a scene in Live a Little, Love a Little. In the film, the King plays a newspaper photographer who takes pictures of Susan Henning as a mermaid, feeding what appears to be Swifty, the false killer whale. The film is a forgettable outing for Elvis, besides a performance of A Little Less Conversation, which would become a mega hit in 2002 after being remixed by JXL. Larry Clark, head trainer from 1959 to 69, got to meet the King and take a photo with him.
Yeah, he came out to Marineland to do a movie, and originally it was going to be called Somewhere, Someplace, Sometime. They changed the name, or they didn't even use that part at Marineland. I don't know. They would stay at the Marineland Hotel a couple of days a week instead of driving all the way back up into Hollywood, which was about 50 miles. Mm-hmm. And so he'd come into the barn and buy us drinks. Yeah, he was a nice guy. I did the Lucy show and did work with the Munsters and the Beverly Hillbillies. I was one of these guys that I didn't care who they were. I wasn't big into the Hollywood people. Mm-hmm. See, Marineland had the same public relations firm, McFadden and Nettie, as most of the movie stars. And so that's how they get all the movie stars to come out to Marineland.
Greg Long, son of Jim Long, who worked at the park from the mid-50s to 1970 as its original announcer, and later became vice president.
So I was talking about the things that they filmed there. That was always interesting to me, of course, as a kid, seeing the movies and TVs. They had a Marineland special filmed there, and somehow Jim Backus, who was Mr. Howell on Gilligan's Island, was sort of reprising his role, and I had just bought Marineland and I don't know what the whole story was, but I got to be in that special as just a walkthrough role, as buying a ticket from him or something like that. There was a science fiction show called The Invaders. That one was filmed there, definitely as a industrial background. That used a water processing plant, I remember, and it was all pretty weird. And one point it scanned over the parking lot, and my dad's car was in it. And we were watching it on TV, and I was like, "Oh, there's Daddy's car!" That was all exciting. Let's see, the Munsters were there. I got to meet Fred Munster. He was very nice.
So you're a little kid, and Fred Gwynn, who's like 100 feet tall,
yeah,
and he's not in black and white, right?
No, he was full color there. Yeah. and Al Lewis, Grandpa, was also there.
Did Al Lewis tell you any dirty jokes? Because he's well known for his body sense of humor.
He did not. No, they were both just treating me like a little kid, and that was fun. So we had that. The Batman movie was shot there. I went down to see the stars, but unfortunately they only had the stuntman there that day. But I got to see the real Batmobile. That was the original George Barris Batmobile was featured at Marineland. Yeah. I do recall my dad saying that, I'm going to say it was the group called the Animals. They came there, and he said they were totally out of control and real jerks. Which is a shame, because I really did like his rendition of Rising Sun.
By 1965, the walrus is captured in Alaska in 1961. Farouk, Priscilla, Woofy, and Petula outgrew their habitat, so park owners built them a new $250,000 home they dubbed the Walrus Waldorf. Situated between the top deck main building and the sea arena, the Walrus Waldorf was a 200,000-gallon seawater habitat, 4 times larger than their old home. The Walrus Waldorf... The Walrus Waldorf boasted 2 separate living and swimming areas and had large underwater windows so visitors could watch the enormous mammals frolic. The old walrus enclosure was repurposed to be the new home of Marineland's seal collection. Here's Mike Drews from Drews Construction. His father, Harold Drews, was Marineland's contractor. When your dad would get a job like that, did you can obviously consult with trainers and things like that for building a habitat for a walrus, or how did they go about doing that?
Oh, yeah. They would come up with the planning and the architecture. My dad just put it together. He'd build it. So it was all just like building a building. You got a set of plans, and but this was more like building a fancy swimming pool, because it had, tunnels where people go through and the underwater windows, and it was quite elaborate, and it had all the filtering system, the salt water pumps and everything. So, it was quite a deal, but I don't know, my dad was kind of a clever guy, so he knew how to put the stuff together. If he couldn't do it, he knew the people that could. So,
Greg Long.
one of the walruses eventually died. I'm going to say that the walrus's name was Farouk.
Yeah.
And turned out that he had a golf ball stuck in his intestines or something like that. What was suspicious was that one of the big boss's sons used to walk around bouncing a golf ball all the time. We suspect there may be a connection there, but I don't know any details beyond that, so I won't get anybody in trouble for that. It's hard to say exactly what happened there.
This is Revelations time on the Marineland podcast, right?
Yeah, I guess someone's got to admit to it. They'll have to fess up.
Ted Griffin had a childhood dream that one day he would be able to ride a whale. But in the 50s and early 60s, the idea that one could ride a killer whale, then thought to be a dangerous man-eater, seemed more than far-fetched. But Griffin would go on to prove the notion wrong and change the face of how we understand killer whales. He would also kick off an era in which countless cetaceans were killed. In 1962, Griffin opened an aquarium at Seattle's World's Fair. The Seattle Aquarium would be a big success, inspiring him to capture a whale and put it on display. For 3 years, he wasted all his resources trying to capture a killer whale, even enlisting the Coast Guard for help, but it came to no avail. But his fortunes changed when the aquarium acquired seal pups, which drove up attendance. In June of 1965, fishermen accidentally caught a killer whale in Namu, British Columbia. Griffin arrived in Namu and paid the fishermen $8,000 for his prize. He transported the whale 400 miles to Seattle by building a 40 by 40-foot sea pen. Thousands of people flocked to the aquarium to see Namu. Griffin and the whale developed a friendship, and he even dared to swim with the animal. People were shocked to see that Namu was gentle and intelligent, and seemed to have a bond with Griffin. The relationship between Namu and Griffin changed public opinion about these magnificent creatures almost overnight.
I'm working with Namu every day, and it's love at this point. I mean, I love this whale. And I'm trying to say to myself, how can I maintain that association, want him to be free like I am to swim around, and yet keep him captive? And it's what I call an anomaly. It's something that I can't quite resolve. So if someone comes at me and says, Ted, how can you do it? I don't want to talk to them about it because I can't really give them a good, clear-cut answer.
In October 1965, an adult female orca was swimming with her calves in Puget Sound when she was harpooned. Her calf, a 14-foot-long, 2,000-pound female, wouldn't leave her dying mother's side. But when she gave up and sunk to the bottom of the ocean floor, the young calf was captured and brought to the Seattle Aquarium. The young female was placed in a sea pen with a male whale, the much larger Namu. The new female was named Shamu, as in friend of Namu. Ted Griffin hoped that one day the two would mate. However, the young female and Namu didn't get along, so she was sold to SeaWorld in San Diego in December 1965. Shamu would go on to become the brand name of countless whales throughout SeaWorld parks. The original died to little fanfare in 1971 as her name was passed on to the next whale. After a year in captivity, Namu drowned after developing a bacterial infection. Griffin would go on to capture whales for aquariums into 1972. July 8, 1966 was the unveiling of one of the most iconic structures and attractions at Marineland, the Sky Tower. Taller than the Statue of Liberty, the Sky Tower had a 244-foot vertical lift and a 70-foot spire that contained the elevator hoist. The tower sat up to 30 passengers on each of the two levels and treated them to a 4-minute ride that presented incredible views of the park and the Pacific Ocean. It was built by Von Roll Ironworks in Switzerland, who famously made the Palm Springs Aerial Tramway and Disneyland's gondola ride, Mike Drews. Because they eventually took the Sky Tower down in 95, but like the footer and the concrete that it sat in was there for until they built Terranea, I think.
Yeah, it was, I remember when they dug it, they had to use a company that did blasting because it was solid rock, and they had to go down about, it seems to me they were 10 feet deep and 30 feet diameter or radius. I can't remember, but that was a lot of concrete and steel that went into that footing. It was huge.
The Sky Tower would go on to be a hit with visitors, but its arrival at Marineland was a bit more than controversial. Tracy Belting, who worked at the park from 76 to 87, finishing in the animal care department.
But I remember when I was a kid, my mom talking about when they were bringing the Sky Tower in by barge to Marineland,
Wow.
that it was during the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there was a big deal where it was in the news that they stopped that barge because they thought that it was, military stuff, not a tourism sky tower that was of parts that were on that barge. But it was a big deal in the LA Times when that happened. And she was telling me the story because here I was, years later in high school, giving the tour for the sky tower. And she goes, I remember when you were really little and there was this Cuban Missile Crisis, and they thought that the sky tower parts on the barge were part of some sort of weapons or something. But I thought that was fun to hear that story too.
That's great.
Yeah.
For the employees, the Sky Tower was a never-ending trip. Mark Grindle worked in guest relations in the early 80s.
They were really loose with what we had to do on there. They did have a prearranged speech. We did have to listen to a warbly tape of the song 26 Miles Across the Sea, 24 hours a day. Really, a lot of it was just answering questions. We would kind of go up and tell them how high the Sky Tower was going, what they were going to be seeing, just letting them know we were going to be spinning around in circles. If there was a script, I never really followed it, but there were a couple of really great lines that I learned from people who trained me on it. One of them was when the ride came to a stop, and I think someone probably stole this from Disneyland, but we would say, thank you for riding Marineland Sky Tower. As you exit the tower, please watch your step and watch your head. And if you do trip or hit your head, please watch your language. So that was something that, that we always got a kick out of that. I improvised one that scared kids once in a while where I would say, welcome to the Sky Tower. And this is as we're going up. I would say, we're going to make, 8 loops as we go to the top at 10 miles an hour. And then we're going to plummet back down to the ground at over 200 miles an hour. And so that's the kind of stuff you improvise because no one could hear you. But, it was always fun. It could be really boring because you would have to take it up and down even if nobody was on it because they wanted it going all the time. It's amazing how often we were asked when we were at the top of the Sky Tower, they would see Catalina Island or Santa Barbara Island, and they would say, or they would ask you, is that China? It's like, no, that's not China. I didn't work there at the time, but there was at one point a big 20-foot long or life-size fiberglass killer whale that was on display in the park for many years. And I guess that they decided that at some point it just got too weathered. So they threw it down in the dump. And I guess once they did that, people were going up the Sky Tower that day, seeing this big killer whale just thrown on the side of the cliff down by what they called the dump. So they got lots of complaints about that, and they had to move it almost immediately. So I would love to hear some other people, tell that story. But that was one of the things that I was told a lot when I worked there.
What did you do to Corky?
Yeah, exactly. From 300 feet up, it looks like a real killer whale. So. Yeah.
Michael Jett, manager of general services in Baja Reef from 1977 to 87.
Yes, and that was also in kind of a back area that wasn't generally open to the public. Completely understandable that they would see an animal out in the open and wonder what was going on. Certainly employees took advantage of that too. I'm sure after enough comments and calls, that killer whale was moved to an inside location where it couldn't be seen. Employees also, just being funny and trying to be silly, took advantage of that. And I have a picture of a good friend of mine that actually has her head stuck in the mouth of this killer whale and pretending like it's biting her or something. And that was fun.
Greg Long.
But so with the restaurant there and everything, the Sky Tower go up and you look over it and you see this old building. and it was kind of like shabby. And so I'm not sure if how closely the two things were tied, but they ended up getting rid of the restaurant and building a new one called the Galley West. And on top of that, it was sort of a round building, and they painted this giant compass rose. And so from the Sky Tower, I just remember being able to look down and seeing the top of the Galley West restaurant and seeing the compass rose.
You may have noticed this show has no advertising. Well, kind of like PBS, we're relying on our listeners to support our efforts to preserve Marineland's history through this podcast, which has taken countless hours to produce. There are two ways you can help. First, you can make a donation to the show through PayPal by clicking on the donate button on our website at marinelandpodcast.com. That's marinelandpodcast.com. Or you can take a deeper dive into Marineland's history by becoming a Patreon subscriber. At patreon.com/marinelandpodcast, you can listen to full interviews with 19 people closest to the park. You'll also get the Patreon exclusive episode, Making Marineland, where I share the backstory of how this podcast came to be. It's all just $5.99 a month. Get started at patreon.com/marinelandpodcast. Thanks for your support. Now back to the show. September 6, 1966 was a landmark day for Marineland, but it wasn't mentioned in the newspapers or made public. A pilot whale with the ID number NOA0002921 was caught in the Pacific Ocean and brought to the park. The pilot whale was given the name Bubbles and would be the last in the lineage of pilot whales to have that stage name. This is the Bubbles that Marineland visitors would grow to love over the next 20-plus years she lived at the park. Jim Roop, Director of Live Entertainment from 1980 to 84.
She was a kick. Bubbles was great. A very animated whale herself. And she has, pilot whales have this really cool rounded nose. And the way their mouth is, it looks like they're always smiling. Mm-hmm. So when Bubbles would come up out of the water and do whatever behavior, it looked like she was having the time of her life. You know, and then Kathy and Shorty, the white-sided dolphins that were in the tank with her that would do the show, too, with her, they seemed like they were high school buddies and just goofing around after school every day. Every show was like that. And it was just really, really nice to see. Bubbles was animated. She was a happy animal, it seemed. You had less trouble with her. For whatever reason, I didn't witness as much of that downtime that I did with some of the other animals like the sea lions and the killer whales. But Bubbles was just, she was the star of the park. Bubbles was, the belle of the ball, the queen of the dance, prom queen, whatever. Her tank was one that was not necessarily in the center of the park, but one that everybody kind of went to first because it was on the same level as the entrance as you come into the park and you pass the escalators. And plus it was right by the cliffs there, so people would go there just to see the view. But Bubbles would like to play around when the show wasn't on, too. So she was just swimming around, just having a great time. She was just a fun animal. But they all were.
Bubbles has a behavior that, to our knowledge, no other whale in the world has. Bubbles does a horizontal spin. A command from Smitty at this end of the tank. Watch Bubbles. Okay, Bubbles, spin, sweetheart. Howdy, girl. Hey, how about one more time? And once again, with a horizontal spin, here's Bubbles.
Bubbles would also become immortalized around this time as the focal point of a dramatic new sign at the park's entrance. To create a sign that would accurately reflect the anatomy of the park's cetaceans, Marineland turned to Leonard C. Bessem, Jr., a paleontologist with the LA County Museum of Natural History. His familiarity with fiberglass techniques to mount fossils at the museum played a big role in his ability to create the sculpture. After it was fabricated, it was transported to the park by helicopter. Here's Mike Drews from Drews Construction. His father, Harold Drews, was Marineland's contractor.
When he built the sign, he got an artist to sculpt a whale out of balsa wood, And I still got it in my office. And they used that to scale the fiberglass model that they actually used for the sign. And he had some boat builder up in the city of Hawthorne, I think, build it. And it was all fiberglass. And then my dad built the structure where the whatever that big deal looks like, waves up on top, and then the foundation to put the whale on. So that was one of the last things he did, I believe.
The end result was a 28-foot-long by 7 feet wide sculpture that weighed 2,000 pounds, featuring bubbles, flanked by 2 white-sided dolphins with a large concrete spray of water behind them. As the new bubbles moved into the circular tank, Bimbo, the large male whale who had dealt with mental issues, came out of retirement and began performing again. But troubles would resurface in the summer of 1967. While trainers prepared for him to do his final leap of the show, Bimbo charged a 2-by-4-foot observation window, shattering the 1.5-inch thick glass. The broken glass resulted in 4 visitors being sent to the hospital, and the tank losing 350,000 gallons of water. Larry Clark.
Don't know exactly how it happened. I was there that day, and I know that 10, 15 minutes before the show, I was up there. I think it happened down on the second level. There were 3 levels of glass. Noticed the water going down. And so I asked the announcer, I said, hey, could you get a hold of the maintenance guys and tell them that to turn the valves, that we're leaking water. We've got to turn the water on or stop the water from going out. Then there were people, kind of acting weird and running up and saying, hey, your window's broken. The whale broke the window. I'm going, what? And all the other people that were around there, the trainers and the divers and the announcers are going, what? So they canceled the show. We went down, and sure enough, there it was on the second deck. The tank held 640,000 gallons of water, so it must have been maybe 200,000 gallons of water or something that had leaked out.
Wow. What did that look like in terms of it? Was it going down the ramps that led up to the observation areas? Or?
Yeah. It went down the ramps. I think it was on the side looking out towards where the killer whale pool was. And so there were doors there that the water could go right out.
All of Bimbo's tank mates, 4 pilot whales and 4 dolphins, were moved to other holding tanks, and Bimbo was left alone for a few weeks to see if he could possibly fend for himself. Marineland staff debated whether the large bull whale should be euthanized or returned to the ocean. They mercifully decided to give him a second chance at life. Greg Long.
Bimbo was the big male, and I think he even crashed against the port, one of the windows, and cracked it. I believe they took him out because he was just too dangerous.
Bimbo was taken out on the Geronimo, the same boat that captured him, and released near the Catalina Channel after a pod of whales was spotted in the area. Recalling the moment when he was set free, a Marineland spokesperson said, when they put him in the water, he hung around the boat for a while, wondering what to do. Chief Curator John Prescott went on to elaborate. We turned him loose in a school of pilot whales and he couldn't believe he was free. He took off in a straight line for 500 yards, like he was looking for a wall, and then he'd jump like a big dolphin, come back, and do it all over again. The Geronimo floated away, leaving Bimbo alone, but free. Bimbo was spotted in 1969 off the coast of Santa Barbara, California, by a U.S. Navy marine mammal collector, and again in San Clemente in 1974.
But he was a good boy. Yeah. He just kind of got tired of playing the game.
In July of 1967, a 5-year-old male killer whale found himself caught in fishermen's nets in Port Hardy, 250 miles northwest of Vancouver, British Columbia. The fishermen fed the whale salmon and then notified Marineland they had caught a whale. 12 Marineland officials made the trip to the northwest to bring the whale to the park. Among the Marineland crew sent to collect the whale was a teenage Mike Drews. So basically, Bill Monahan or whomever contacts your dad and says, we've got to get an orca on a plane.
Yeah, what he said is we've got a call out to any fishing vessel that snags a killer whale in their nets, and we want to be ready if that happens. So he goes, we want to build a box. Here's the plane that we're going to put it on. Here's the size of the cargo door on the plane, and here's the size of the box we can fit in there. So my dad built this beautiful box in fiberglass and had it all built, and it was sitting in our shop, and then, I saw it down there, and he told me what it was all about. So anyway, I was in junior high at the time of Rolling Hills, and I was going to summer school, and this lady came in from the office and said, we got an emergency call for you. So I go to the office, and it was my dad. He goes, they caught a killer whale up in Canada. We got to get this box hauled up to Van Nuys Airport so they can put it on the plane. So I went to my car. I drove down to our shop, and got the big flatbed truck, and we loaded the box up, and I headed up to Van Nuys Airport. I was wearing Levi's and a T-shirt, and that's it. We get up there, and we go to put the box on the plane, and no one told my dad that the cargo doors on the plane had rounded corners, so the box wouldn't slide in. So we ended up, my dad was there, and he goes, just go to the rental yard and get a chainsaw. We'll cut this thing in half and bolt it together once it's inside the plane. So I go, okay. So I go over and grab all the tools, come back, and we're just sweating our butts off. And we get this box cut in half, and we roll the first half in, and then we made these big 4x4 connector boards that we could bolt it all back together once it's in the plane. So we got in there and strapped down, and we're getting ready to go home, and the people from Marineland going, wow, this is complicated. He goes, you guys better come with us. We're going to need help. So wow. I had no luggage or nothing. My dad was the same way. So he goes, okay. So we jumped on this old DC, I think it was a DC-6 airplane or DC-4, something like that. It was a 4-engine prop plane. And all of a sudden, we're headed to Canada. Wow. And so we fly up there, and it was a large 4-engine plane, but they had pulled all the seats out of the first, 12 rows, so the box would fit up there. And then after the box was in, they reattached the seats in the back, and that's where we all sat. There was probably 18 people between all the trainers and all the people that were documenting the trip, and me and my dad and our crew, and we landed, and everybody except me and my dad take off into town, and we had to unload the box and get it on a truck and bring it in. So by the time we got into town, it was late at night. And we show up, and it's this little fishing port, but at the same port, they did a lot of logging. And I guess the Indian tribes were involved in the logging, and then the fishermen, I don't know what their crew was, but anyway, they were having a big brawl in the streets. Everybody was fighting. It was just like a movie. And so next morning we woke up, and it's cold up there. We weren't dressed for it, so we found a little gift shop. We bought some Pendleton shirts and stuff like that, and went down to the port, and they had a fishing boat. We could see it coming in from the distance, and it had a boom kind of off to the side of it. And what they had done is they had caught this killer whale in their nets, and they put it in like a big lifting hammock. It was just a big tarp with pipes on both sides where they could lift it, and it was kind of cradled in that. And they were just driving in real slow with it alongside the boat. And they pulled up to the dock, and we had our truck and our box, and they hoisted this thing up and set him over into the box we made. And then they had this truck there with just tons of ice in it. We just packed the whale in ice. So I guess they got to keep him wet and cool. Yeah.
Did the whale move at all, or struggle?
No, it didn't. And it was just until I got on the plane with him, I didn't even start thinking about that. But anyway, we headed off to the airport, and we went to put him in. And now it gets complicated because we can't put the box in the plane in one piece. So we've got his head towards the front of the box, and we get it up on this. They have a scissor lift truck that lifts it up to the side of the plane where the door is. And the box is sitting on these rolling pipes. And we had all these come-alongs and pulleys and stuff, and we're winching the box in. We pulled it as far as we could with the box together. Then we had to unbolt the back half of the box, slide it off the back of the whale, and then we were able to pull the box in and bend his tail and get him in the plane.
Wow.
And so they're trying to fire the plane up, and it was an old plane, and they were having trouble getting the engines running. So, I mean, this is just like a Twilight Zone deal. They bring out these power units to try to jumpstart the plane. I mean, it took an hour to get the engine started.
And you've got a whale in the plane.
And we got a whale sitting in there, and we have our doubts about this whole thing. But anyway, we're all on there ready to go, and they finally get it running, and we just blast off. And Well, one funny story about the trip back on the plane was they had to have a stewardess when you have over so many people on the plane. Mm-hmm. So the trainer, one of the trainers, he was quite young, and he was kind of hitting on the steward. So they were up by the front of the whale. They were petting the whale, and she was petting the whale, and he was, talking to her. And she leaned over the whale, and the whale took a deep breath and just blew a bunch of whale snot all over her. and I laughed so hard. She was so embarrassed, but it was just, the whale just took a breath and had to clear himself, I guess. So that was kind of funny. But started heading home, and we're coming back, and we get about, I think we're somewhere over Washington. And my dad's a pilot, and he's just, he's real nervous about this plane after the engine starting problem. So he's always looking out the windows, and he sees this oil just pouring out one of the motors. So he's right on it. He goes up there and gets into the cockpit with the pilot and said, "Hey, you got an engine that's just coming apart back there. You got to do something about it." So the pilot comes back and looks at it and goes, "Shoot." So they feathered that motor. So now we're on 3 engines. And we're still going. I guess they checked with everybody. Everybody said, "Yeah, let's just do it." So we're heading back, and it's getting dark, and it seems to me we got down around Bakersfield, and they were having problems with another motor, but they were able to keep that one going. And we finally got back to LAX probably about 1 in the morning or something.
Oh,
and so they stopped us out on the field, and the customs came out to us because we had the whale in there. We had to stay with them, and so they had a big crew and a crane sitting there, and they were all prepared on the other end. My dad says, "You want to go home?" And I go, "Well, heck no." I go, "I'm this much. I'm going to watch that thing hit the water." Oh, yeah. So we stuck it out, and we followed the truck down to Marineland, and they had the crane down, and they lifted this thing into one of the training tanks. And boy, it was emotional. I mean, I'm not an emotional guy, but that was quite an experience, I have to admit.
What? So how did the whale react to being in the tank at first? What was?
Well, he never reacted at all. I mean, he wouldn't move, and you could see him breathing out of his hole in the back of his head, and I kind of went up to the trainer at one point on the flight, and I says, "What's to keep this whale from just start bucking and breaking this plane in half?" And he goes, "Whales are really smart animals, and they know when not to cause a ruckus. They just put themselves in kind of like a hibernation mode and kind of ride it out." And so we were all trusting that the trainer was right, and he was. So it was an amazing experience.
On July 1st, the whale, named Orky, was placed into the 60-foot-long, 175,000-gallon Dolphin and Whale College tank on the lower deck. By the time he arrived, he had been out of the water for 21 hours. But he soon adapted to his new home and was eating 250 pounds of mackerel a day. While Marineland is best known for having 2 performing killer whales, Orky and Corky, there was a series of killer whales that lived and sadly died in the park in the late 60s and early 70s. We'll meet more of them in the coming episodes. The whales would be needed to compete with SeaWorld down south in San Diego. After the arrival of Shamu, SeaWorld's attendance boomed, and by 1967 had eclipsed Marineland by 500,000 visitors a year. In 1968, Marineland hosted 1 million guests, but SeaWorld had 1.4 million. That's all for now, but before you exit the gates, be sure you get your hand stamp so you can come back through the turnstile without having to buy another ticket. On the next episode of LA Zone Marineland, we'll take a deep dive into the next era of the park's history as killer whales become the star attraction in the 70s. We'll also see how a lack of investment in the park sent attendance into a deep dive. LA Zone Marineland was written, produced, and hosted by Todd Perry. That's me. But this wouldn't be possible without the help of a wonderful group of Marinelanders who shared their incredible stories. For more information, references, and to support the show, visit marinelandpodcast.com and follow us on Twitter at MarinelandLAPod. Please be sure to sign up for our Patreon page, where you can learn even more about the history of Marineland by listening to full interviews with 19 people closest to the park. You'll also get the Patreon-exclusive episode, Making Marineland, that tells the backstory of how this podcast came to be. Get over 15 hours of fun for just $5.99 a month. Get started at patreon.com/MarinelandPodcast. That's patreon.com/MarinelandPodcast.